This is Bloomberg Businessweek Daily, reporting from the magazine that helps global leaders stay ahead, with insight on the people, companies, and trends shaping today's complex economy, plus global business, finance, and tech news as it happens. Bloomberg Businessweek Daily with Carol Massar and Tim Stenovec, live on Bloomberg Radio, television, YouTube, and Bloomberg Originals.
And a very good afternoon, everybody, across Bloomberg platforms. Yes, indeed, this is Bloomberg Businessweek Daily. Carol Massar along with Tim Stenovec. And we've got stocks pretty much holding on to losses following comments by Jay Powell, his first public comment since that Fed decision last week. We're going to talk about the trade. We're going to talk about Jay Powell, what he said. We're going to get to that in just a moment.
And everything we're doing this hour and everything we're doing for the next 3 hours on Bloomberg Businessweek Daily, really against a backdrop of what is happening here in New York City, because that is where the world leaders are. President Trump making comments early today. We're going all in on everything happening with the UN General Assembly and Climate Week, New York City.
We are indeed. On that, we've got the founder and CEO of a firm that really deals with the intersection of climate science and capital markets. We'll get into that. We're also going to get into what we are hearing when it comes to the war between Israel and Hamas. What is the future for a Palestinian state? A lot of that to come. That, indeed, in the next 60 minutes.
First up, though, a check of the day's trade and top business stories. Charlie Pellet is closely watching the markets, as we all do. Hey, Charlie.
Hi, thank you very much. That's what we do here at Bloomberg, Tim. We have got the Dow, the S&P, NASDAQ, slight bounce off the bottom. We got you covered on U.S. markets and in the global markets, with the S&P right now down 37, 66.56 where we stand now. That is a drop of 0.6%. Your Dow Industrials down 122, trading lower by 0.3%. NASDAQ down almost 200 points, down 196 now, down 0.9%. Traders driving stocks lower, with Fed Chair Jay Powell offering no hints on whether he might support a rate cut at the central bank's October meeting. Our Michael McKee will have a whole lot more on Powell's remarks coming up in just a moment. Right now, we've got the 10-year on this Jay Powell Tuesday yielding 4.11% of the 2-year, 3.58%. Spot gold up $32 the ounce, and precious metal up 0.9%. We're looking at a record there, 37.78, while West Texas Intermediate crude up 1.6%, 63.29 a barrel. Disney raising the price of Disney Plus starting October 21st. That, according to The Verge, Disney shares down 0.4%. Not the only story involving Disney. Jimmy Kimmel Live will return to the air tonight, ending a suspension that Disney imposed following controversial remarks that the ABC late-night host made about the assassination of Republican activist Charlie Kirk. Now, not all ABC stations will be carrying his show. Nexstar Media Group says it will join Sinclair in not airing Jimmy Kimmel Live tonight. Shares of Sinclair, they're up 6.2%. Nexstar up by 1.2%. UBS sweetening payouts for U.S. wealth advisors to stem defections. And this headline right now on the Bloomberg Professional Service: Major League Baseball is going to be using robot umpires to call balls and strikes next season. That, according to the AP. I'm Charlie Pellet. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie, thank you so much. Well, it is less than 1 week since the most recent Fed decision, just last Wednesday. Today, we heard from Fed Chairman Jay Powell in his first public comments since that meeting. He spoke on the economic outlook at the Greater Providence Chamber of Commerce in Rhode Island, and he shared how the Fed is kind of between a rock and a hard place.
Near-term risks to inflation are tilted to the upside, and risks to employment are tilted to the downside, a challenging situation. Two-sided risks mean that there is no risk-free path. If we ease too aggressively, we could leave the inflation job unfinished and need to reverse course later to fully restore 2% inflation. If we maintain restrictive policy too long, the labor market could soften unnecessarily. When our goals are in tension like this, our framework has long called for us to balance both sides of our dual mandate.
All right, that, of course, is Fed Chair Jay Powell just about 90 minutes ago. With more on the comments, Fed policy, the U.S. economic backdrop, we bring back Bloomberg TV and radio international economic and policy correspondent Michael McKee here in studio. So, Mike, Fed Chair Jay Powell today. We had Stephen Meyer on yesterday. He's the newest member of the Fed. Dumb question, but hey, I'm just going to go there because why not? How different are the views that we got from Fed Governor Myron versus Fed Chair Jay Powell?
It's hard to compare the two of them because of the position that Powell's in, and he didn't really say anything different than he did last week. I can't account for what the stock market is doing, but the bond market and the futures markets in terms of Fed rate cuts haven't changed. He basically just said, status quo, we're looking at the data. Steve Myron obviously made the case that we should be cutting significantly. There's much more of a contrast between him and what we heard from Raphael Bostic and Alberto Musalem yesterday than there is between him and Powell. And I don't think you can really take anything away from what Powell said today, because if you look at, he spoke last Wednesday, and since then we've had one jobless claims report and a couple of PMIs, and that's the only economic data. So there hasn't been anything that would change your view one way or another, and he didn't change his view.
You said you can't comment on the equity market, but I'm still going to ask you about it, Mike, because at 12:58, this headline crossed. Jay Powell saying at 12:58, some asset prices elevated versus historical levels. By many measures, equity prices are fairly highly valued. And since then, we've actually seen the S&P 500 move lower and sort of stay lower. Is it rare for him to comment on equity price valuation, equity valuations?
And maybe that's the one thing that people took seriously out of this. It's not that the Fed is going to do anything about it, but it's sort of a jawboning warning. This is, it's not the same level as Alan Greenspan and irrational exuberance, but it is.
Is it the Powell version of that?
Maybe a little bit of a warning. But he also goes on to say, and others on the Fed have, that we don't really have any major financial system dangers out there. And so I suspect the equity markets will get over this and come back as soon as NVIDIA sneezes or something like that. They'll start buying again.
I mean, there's a lot of it to do that. I think so many investors, and we've heard from various market watchers, that they expect a bunch of rate cuts. Is it that Jay Powell's not committing to more rate cuts? We've got a couple more meetings this year. He's not.
Well, people are always wanting the Fed to promise them what's going to happen. It's much easier to invest if you know exactly what's going to happen in the future.
Funny how that works.
But we walked out of the press conference, the Fed decision last Wednesday, with the markets expecting 2 more cuts, basically because that was what was in the dot plot. SEP was a little more iffy on it, but that's what the market's set up for. And Powell did not disabuse that. If the Fed doesn't like where the markets are, they find ways to sort of point that out and to steer them in the right direction. And he didn't do any steering today. So one can assume that their view is we are leaning towards rate cuts unless something happens to talk us out of it. And that's what we have to wait and see.
Rate cuts as a result of a job market that he said is not solid anymore, and also saying we're in a low fire, low hire economy. Job creation has dropped very sharply. Rate cuts because of that?
Yeah. We don't know. Yes, that's what they look at the labor market and especially unemployment as a signal for what the economy overall is doing, because obviously if companies are seeing margins compress and they've got to keep them up, they might let people go, and then people don't have money to spend and the economy slows down and you get into this the whole recession scenario. Nobody's talking about recession anymore at this point, but that's what the Fed worries about. And so they're thinking that they're better off propping up the labor market right now because they think inflation is going to gradually dissipate. It'll go up some more because of tariffs, but they're not thinking it's going to be a huge impact. The out there leaving is we could be wrong. Right. So if that's the case, we don't want to commit right now to say we're absolutely cutting rates, but we're leaning that direction.
So this rock in this hard place. So if inflation persists, Mike, and we do see continued weakness in the labor market, or things steepen in terms of the labor market coming undone, what does the Fed do? What do they fight? What do they try to improve? Which mandate do they pay attention to?
That's the conundrum. What they have said in the past is what you do in that situation is you look at the one that is going to be the hardest to fix, and you deal with that. But in this case, they don't know. we haven't had a situation like this with tariffs since, Smoot-Hawley. And so they're kind of making it up as they go along. And they're going to have to be flexible is kind of what they're trying to tell everybody. Don't get too comfortable one way or another, and let's see how this goes. And we can act on either one.
We're going to talk about President Trump at the UN in just a moment. I was listening to you on Bloomberg TV just, I think, in the last hour or so. You noted that there was some politics in his comments today, meaning Fed Chair Jay Powell, something about a cheap shot, but what do we need to know here?
Well, there were a couple of remarks. We've had people, especially Governor Myron and the president in recent weeks, talking about the Fed getting way out of its lane and doing a lot of things that it shouldn't be doing, and they should get out of all this stuff. And Powell put a paragraph in his speech today saying we had to do these things because in 2008 and then with the pandemic, the world was going to blow up. The financial world was going to blow up, and we couldn't let that happen. It's not that we wanted to grab all this. It's that we had to do this. And then later on, he was asked about whether they're political, kind of the standard question they get. And he gave the standard answer of, no, we just do what's best for the country. And then he added, the people who are saying that are taking cheap shots, which the first time you really see the guy get a little annoyed at what's going on out there. He is always under control, but he just let that one slip.
All right, good stuff, and certainly an important speech today. Mike, thank you so much. Bloomberg TV and Radio, international economics and policy correspondent Michael McKee. All right, we should keep in mind that we really saw a lot of unity at the most recent Fed meeting, some dissenters the meeting beforehand. Meantime, if you were at the UN this morning, there were no calls for unity. Instead, President Trump assailed the United Nations and other countries in a grievance-laden speech that accused the world body of offering nothing but empty words, labeled climate change a con job, and warned open borders risk destroying nations. He also criticized the organization that housed his morning address.
I ended 7 wars, dealt with the leaders of each and every one of these countries, and never even received a phone call from the United Nations offering to help in finalizing the deal. What is the purpose of the United Nations? The UN has such tremendous potential. I've always said it. It has such tremendous, tremendous potential, but it's not even coming close to living up to that potential. For the most part, at least for now, all they seem to do is write a really strongly worded letter and then never follow that letter up. It's empty words, and empty words don't solve war.
All right, that, of course, was President Trump, addressing the UN General Assembly this morning. Do want to mention a headline crossing President Trump to meet with the head of France, Mr. Macron, and also the head of Uzbekistan while in New York City. So these headlines are going to continue to come. With more on the president's speech, we want to go right to it. Josh Wingrove is in the House, not in D.C. He's Bloomberg News senior White House correspondent. Josh, you covered the president, all his twists and turns. This was an interesting speech.
It was. It's great to be here.
Great to have you
here. This is a rare treat for us here. Look, the Trump show hits the road every once in a while, and the aperture opens. And welcome to the second term. He hit a lot of themes that he'd hit previously in this, although probably more strongly than in the past. Basically, he sort of assailed the UN over, as you mentioned, climate and immigration as 2 big topics, going so far as to basically completely dismiss the notion of climate change as a hoax, but also on immigration, saying that it's the single biggest political issue of our era. So trying to draw a line in the sand. But Trump, he talked about the teleprompter not working. This was sort of a bit of his in the campaign. Let's just say it's open to interpretation whether that was actually the case or not. The UN said the teleprompter was working fine. And of course, but then was griping about the escalator.
That was not working fine.
That was not. I can confirm the escalator was not working, and then later was working. It seemed to get under his skin, and that's when he went off about the renovation that he wished he'd done, and told them, you could be walking on marble, you're walking on terrazzo flooring, that, right? So, it was a journey, a weave, as President Trump likes to say, but I think it just underscores not only his longstanding disdain for the UN. Remember, the U.S. is delinquent right now in its funds to support the UN. Trump has given no indication that he plans to change that, but also that kind of new grievances are adding on. In particular, he thinks he's obviously kind of gently, somewhat campaigning for a Nobel Prize. He talks about ending 7 wars, and he's wondering, where the UN has been. He sort of wanted credit for it, said they didn't get a phone call. But Trump being Trump, he got off stage, sat down with Guterres, and then was all smiles and nice. So pick your lens, I suppose. Yeah,
even mentioning other leaders who he had said things about, but then had run into personally, essentially saying, I ran into this person. I can't believe I'm going to be talking about this. And it's kind of, for you who covers Trump, covers the president, it's not surprising because that's the way he is. But for world leaders who are sitting there, who are not necessarily accustomed to following every comment that he makes, especially at the UN, this was unconventional.
I think that's fair to say. I mean, if you're being sort of re-onboarded into a Trump speech after maybe 6 years, it had been since his last one, for sure, this is going to take you by storm. I do think that there are things to watch that will make news today, for sure, beyond the speech, including the bilateral with President Zelensky, which should be wrapping up just as we speak, right around or just has wrapped up. Trump has really shifted on Zelensky a lot. He said today that it's remarkably brave what the Ukrainians are doing. That is a big shift in tone from January. And so that one we're watching, he sort of tacitly endorsed the notion of NATO nations shooting down Russian planes if they violate
Does that have to do with the recent violations of airspace that we've seen?
I think I personally would read that more as a Trump sort of hand-wavy type of comment. I would not read that as like an emphatic shift in U.S. policy. Okay. He sort of danced around the drone issue. He danced around it again in a separate answer today. But he did say flatly, yes, he thinks that NATO should have the right to shoot down Russian planes, not drones, if they incur on NATO airspace. So we'll see. As you know, this is speaking of longtime grievances. It wasn't just the UN. NATO, of course, he has had sort of a bumpy ride with, but he's been more pro-NATO as of late, in particular touting the increased defense spending pledges from Europe and Canada and other allies generally. So I think that one we got a lot of eyes on. This Macron meeting could be interesting. He made a little bit of news last night, wandering the streets of New York, upset about the president's motorcade. We can all relate to that.
Well, everybody knows a city bike is the way to go during the UN General Assembly.
That's
so
right.
If only he had had a helmet, maybe we would have seen the French leader on a city bike.
We can hope.
That would have been lovely.
Yes, yeah, we can hope. But no, that'll be good. Trump is hosting a reception tonight. We don't actually know who's going. So we don't know if this is sort of a friends-only thing, like, Millet and the other whatevers, or if it's a broader thing. So we'll see. We don't know right now whether they'll let the press in, but I'll be there waiting, hoping, praying. So
Josh
I'll keep you
outside.
posted.
Hey, I'll be here outside waiting for you guys to invite me in.
On your city bike?
Yeah.
On your city bike?
Yeah.
I mean, against everything else that's going, we're still doing stories about the H-1B visas. I mean, there's just so much, Josh. When you look at the president, I don't know how you guys do it because there's so much coming at you. Top of the White House agenda right now, because sometimes I feel like, watch here, guys, but don't look at here, which is maybe something impactful. I don't know. How are you sussing out kind of what matters right now when it comes to the White House? I
mean, Trump always likes to flood the zone. That's been a consistent theme throughout his presidencies. I think on the H-1B thing, this is a big change, and it's a little unclear to me whether they're shifting it on the fly. Remember, they had their big announcement Friday. Everyone's brains exploded. On Saturday, they started to, let's say, detail. Critics might say walk back some of the things. For instance, Secretary Lutnick said things on Friday that have not ultimately been the policy. And then today, the new development is sort of getting rid of the lottery system. We knew that was happening. Trump had signaled before the whole $100,000 fee thing that was happening. But this is a huge change. And so they, whether its impact on the tech sector, on healthcare, all this is really up in the air right now. And it's, part and parcel, obviously, with a complete overhaul of the American immigration system as he sees it. So, people that have H-1Bs now are breathing a sigh of relief because there was a moment there where they were like, oh, shoot, we got to get back on U.S. soil, in hours, but it doesn't look like that's the case. So for now, that's the shiny thing we're looking at.
So while you're here in town, come back.
Yes.
Josh Wingrove, he is Bloomberg News senior White House correspondent. Josh, thank you as always. Coming up next, more when it comes to geopolitics, what's top of mind for global leaders in town this week. In a moment, we're going to talk about the outlook for the war in Gaza.
It's 2:21 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg. We are very close once again to session lows. The Dow, the S&P, NASDAQ all retreating. S&P down 44, looking at a loss now of just about 0.7%. The S&P at 66.49, retreating from a record. The Dow down 158, down 0.3%. NASDAQ Composite Index down 1%. NASDAQ 100 Index down 0.8%. And the Russell 2000 Index of small cap shares, which have been higher for much of the morning, down now by 0.3%. The Mag 7 index tumbling 1.5%. The 10-year 4.11%, but the 2-year 3.58%. Gold up $32 the ounce, up 0.9%. And West Texas Intermediate crude up now by 1.8%, 63.37 a barrel. So traders driving stocks from records, with Fed Chair Jay Powell offering no hints in his speech as to whether he might support a rate cut at the central bank's October meeting. A U.S. judge has ruled that construction can resume on Ørsted's nearly completed wind farm off the coast of Rhode Island after the Trump administration tried to halt the project. Shares of Ørsted, the ADRs in the U.S., up now by 14.4%. Recapping stocks lower, S&P down 0.6%. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Charlie Pelleton. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie, thanks so much. Well, France recognized Palestine as an independent state, and along with Saudi Arabia at a UN conference led by the two countries, called on Israel to end the war in Gaza immediately. Now, several countries, including the UK, Canada, Australia, and Portugal, formally recognized Palestine, Tim, joining almost 150 nations that had already made the move.
Not among them, the United States. President Trump addressing the reasons why when he spoke this morning to the UN General Assembly here in New York.
Some of this body is seeking to unilaterally recognize a Palestinian state. The rewards would be too great for Hamas terrorists for their atrocities. This would be a reward for these horrible atrocities, including October 7th, even while they refuse to release the hostages or accept a ceasefire. Those who want peace should be united with one message: release the hostages now. Just release the hostages now.
By President Trump at the UN General Assembly earlier today, the Israeli ambassador to the UN pictured in that video as well. Hey, joining us with what may be next in the war between Israel and Hamas, Mona Yacoubian. She's Director and Senior Advisor, Middle East Program at the Center for Strategic and International Studies. She joins us from D.C. She has more than 30 years of experience working on the Middle East and North Africa, and she has spent time at USAID, also the State Department, a lot more. So she's got a great perspective on this. Mona, great to have you here with us. In terms of the meetings this week, what you're hearing so far, do you think anything will come out in terms of progress toward ending the war between Israel and Hamas?
No, unfortunately, I don't see any near-term prospect for a ceasefire. We're sort of watching this weird paradox where there's growing momentum for the declaration of a Palestinian state, and yet nothing could be further from reality on the ground, certainly in Gaza and beyond.
So then is the recognition symbolic? And if it is symbolic, does it do more than just make Israel feel isolated?
Well, it's certainly symbolic. It's hard, as I said, it doesn't translate to anything concrete on the ground. It certainly has had, I think, the effect of isolating Israel, and in a way, though, I think, therefore, having Israel also entrench its position further. Prime Minister Netanyahu has been very clear that he is in no way, shape, or form interested in seeing a Palestinian state come to fruition. And so that's why without the buy-in of Israel or the United States, it's very hard to see how these declarations really go any further than simply the statements that are being made.
What about financial pressure and economic pressure on Israel in particular? I mean, the EU, Israel's biggest trading partner, is discussing suspending Israel's preferential commerce benefits, although some key German politicians have expressed their disapproval. We've also talked about, the money that Israel is spending on this war and the impact it's having on its economy. How much of a financial and economic cost, how much more can Israel endure? Let's start there. Or is that putting pressure for them to also bring an end to this? Putting aside the impact on human life.
Which is significant. But I think, as you rightly point out, first, we're still a ways from, I think, concerted EU action against Israel because of, the kind of the opposition of countries like Germany. My own view is, barring significant leverage from the United States as the primary ally and supporter of Israel, it's really hard to see how any of these measures are going to have a real impact on Israeli decision making.
What kind of leverage? Is that in the form of funds? Is it in the form of weapons? What's the leverage?
Well, I mean, I think arms sales are often raised as a key leverage measure that the U.S. could take, restricting arms sales, maybe only selling defensive weapons, or perhaps a full embargo on arms sales. These are certainly measures that have been discussed by Democrats in Congress. But again, we haven't seen those take on any momentum. And in fact, if anything, the Trump administration is actually proposing increased arms sales to Israel.
What would you say to folks out there? And we heard from the president, who said those who want peace should be united with one message: release the hostages now, just release the hostages. Those critics out there who say the ball right now is in Hamas's court. They can end this by releasing the hostages.
Well, there's reporting that Hamas is proposing a limited 60-day ceasefire in exchange for a partial release of the hostages, and then perhaps additional releases as the ceasefire goes on. At the end of the day, yes, of course, Hamas on the ground is a critical element in this, but Israel is as well. And there really needs to be perhaps movement on the part of Israel as well towards some kind of a ceasefire negotiation, positive movement in the direction of a ceasefire.
Yeah, I think, on the flip side to what Tim said, I mean, why wouldn't Israel say, yeah, ceasefire, let's bring those folks home?
Well, let's be clear. We're saying Israel as though it's a unitary actor, which of course is not the case. So there have been massive demonstrations in Israel by across the political spectrum, and certainly by hostage families, really demanding that the Israeli government do more to reach a ceasefire. And it's really, Prime Minister Netanyahu and those directly around him who have really, put the brakes on any effort to actually move those negotiations along.
On that, we're going to be joined a little later in our program, just at the 4 o'clock hour, by Ethan Bronner. Typically, he joins us from Tel Aviv, but he's bringing the Tel Aviv view to New York. He's going to be in our studio a little later, so we'll get an update from him on what's happening on the ground in Tel Aviv right now, too. Yeah,
looking forward to that. Hey, one thing I wanted to ask you, Mona, I mean, I don't want to sound naive, but why has this really gone on for so long? Before this war, we were talking about Netanyahu, the Prime Minister of Israel, maybe losing his job. There was so much pushback against him. I'm just trying to understand what's really at the heart of this. You have studied the region for a long time. You understand conflict. And I just wonder, why it's going on for so long, and really what do we get on the other side of this beyond a lot of loss?
Well, enormous loss and devastation. I mean, unfortunately, conflicts take on dynamics of their own. And I think we've seen that in Gaza, where, there's efforts that have been made to move toward a ceasefire. Of course, let's not forget, just a couple of weeks ago, Qatar was in the midst of mediating between Israel and Hamas when Israel unleashed strikes on Doha. That immediately suspended that mediation. And so it's very hard to actually bring adversaries to the table and move toward compromise when one side or the other believes that it can continue to make gains on the ground. And I think certainly in the case of both Hamas and Israel, we're not seeing either side ready to sort of give up, surrender, come to the table and reach some sort of conclusion to this conflict.
As Carol mentioned in the introduction, you've spent decades working on the Middle East and North Africa. You focused on conflict analysis, governance and stabilization, conflict prevention, USAID, U.S. State Department, and much more. If you were advising U.S. leaders right now and Israeli leaders right now to end this conflict, how would you advise them?
I would say that the most significant military gains have already been made. And this isn't me. This is the opinion of senior leadership in the Israeli military, that net, the costs of continuing this conflict are greater than any benefit. This is the moment to move toward a conclusion. It will be now 2 years this October. Since October 7, there are still some 20 Israeli hostages alive, still in Gaza. It's time to bring this conflict to an end so that they can come home and the region can move toward stabilization.
You know, we talked about the cost to Israel, financial, economic, and other. The war has decimated also the Palestinian economy. The World Bank saying it was experiencing, quote, its deepest contraction over a generation. More than 65,000 Palestinians have died since the start of the conflict. And that's, again, according to the Hamas-run health ministry. I mean, there's costs on all sides. Tim.
Yeah, and Carol raised a good question when we were talking about this ahead of time, which is essentially, okay, what's left or of a, quote unquote, Palestinian state at the end of this conflict? What happens in Gaza?
Well, the devastation cannot be overstated. I mean, some 90% of infrastructure has been destroyed. We are seeing, the Israelis are currently undertaking an incursion into Gaza City. There are continuing displacements of Palestinian civilians, massive hunger and even famine in parts of Gaza. So first, I think the first step is for the fighting to come to a conclusion. And then, unfortunately, it's going to be a long time and is going to take enormous resources for Gaza to rebuild. And of course, none of that will happen in the absence of some sort of political settlement.
Well, and I just want to go back to, we talked about Israel being increasingly isolated when it comes to other world leaders. The U.S., too, kind of isolated in its stance on this. Is the U.S. still a key voice in this war and helping to bring an end to it?
I think the U.S. is indispensable to bringing an end to this war. It is really only the United States that exercises the kind of leverage and influence over Israel, and of course, has the deep ties with Arab governments that support the Palestinians. The U.S. is really in a unique position. And I really hope that the Trump administration seizes on this unique position that it has to do, as President Trump promised in his inauguration speech. He wants to be a peacemaker. This is a conflict that's really crying out for resolution.
All right. Well, good to get your view on all of this. There's so much going on and continuing to come at us, certainly this week. Mona Yacoubian, thank you. Director and Senior Advisor, Middle East Program at the Center for Strategic and International Studies. We're going to kind of stay on this, Tim, when we come back. Yeah,
we're going to talk about the intersection of climate science, capital markets, product innovation, and everything happening this week, not just at the UN General Assembly, but also Climate Week NYC. That's next. This is Bloomberg Businessweek Daily.
It's 2:40 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg. Traders driving stocks down from records. Fed Chair Jay Powell offering no hints on whether he might support a rate cut at the central bank's October meeting. You heard the chair's remarks on Bloomberg. Right now, we have got stocks very close to session lows. The Dow, the S&P, NASDAQ all in the red. S&P down 40 at 66.53, a drop now of 0.6%. Dow Industrials down 0.2%, lower by 102 points, while NASDAQ, the composite index, down 227. For NASDAQ, a drop of 1%. The 10-year, 4.11%, with the 2-year that's yielding 3.58%. Gold is up $31 the ounce, up 0.8%, and West Texas Intermediate crude up 2%, 63.51 a barrel. Boeing shares are up 1.7%. The plane maker secured an order from Uzbekistan Airways, while the U.S. ambassador to China is indicating a major order from the world's second largest economy is close to being finalized. And we're keeping an eye on Firefly Aerospace shares. They are plunging after second quarter revenue came in short of Wall Street's expectations. The small rocket launcher is working to ramp up the frequency of its flights. Right now, we've got shares of Firefly down 15.8%. For on-demand news, 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Charlie Pelleton. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie, we are staying on the UN General Assembly because along with it, it is also Climate Week NYC. Both came together really this morning during President Trump's address at the UN, where he talked about a lot, including what he called the green scam.
Another UN official stated in 1989 that within a decade, entire nations could be wiped off the map by global warming. Not happening. You know, it used to be global cooling. Now they could just call it climate change because that way they can't miss. It's the greatest con job ever perpetrated on the world, in my opinion. If you don't get away from this green scam, your country is going to fail.
All right, that again was President Trump earlier today at the UN General Assembly. There's a lot going on when it comes to climate this week, Tim, and we've got a good view on the intersection of climate science, capital markets, and product innovation.
Olivia Albrecht is with us. She's with Artemeter. She's CEO and founder. She previously served as CEO at Aspiration, a climate finance and Oak Tree portfolio company offering sustainability solutions for consumers, businesses, and investors. Before that, she spent a decade at PIMCO. Most recently, as head of ESG business strategy. Olivia, good to see you back with us. A carbon investment manager, your firm. I'm wondering how the role changes during an administration such as this versus a previous administration that doesn't necessarily call climate change a scam.
Yeah, major differences, I suppose, from a U.S. perspective. I guess I always like to start in the context of carbon, which is a $1 trillion asset, where most of the assets are actually in the compliance markets, which are local, regional networks of ETS-traded schemes. And that is not changing based off of who's in the White House in the United States. A lot of work and a lot of attention is focused on the voluntary markets, where these are voluntary actions by corporations, which again are not swayed by who's in the White House. And we see that there's still a lot of conviction in the carbon markets more broadly. And again, when you think about it in the context of a $1 trillion market, with the bulk of it being in these regional ETS schemes or these carbon tax schemes across these regions, there's not much change as it relates to this space.
So major companies are buying carbon credits. It's all continuing as it has that we've seen over the last few years.
Again, when you bifurcate out the $1 trillion marketplace with 90+ % of the market being in the compliance markets, those are regulated assets. Those
so
are regulated
entities. Do it.
They have to do it. What we spend a lot of time talking about in the carbon markets, where there's a lot of attention, is going to be in the smaller portion, which is a couple $2 billion marketplace on the voluntary side. And what you're seeing, and as we discussed before, is there's a pullback in terms of the communication of the work that a lot of major corporations are doing, but nonetheless, they continue to buy carbon. What we're seeing is that they're actually making longer-term investments, signing long-term 5-year offtake, really leaning into this space, but they're doing it more quietly than they were perhaps a few months ago.
Is more quietly the only change, or is the actual rate of what they're buying and how they're buying changed?
No, I think what you're seeing is that the quantum of what is being purchased and signed up for long-term offtake is actually increasing. The quality is increasing. The longevity of the contracts are actually increasing.
Nobody's talking about it, though.
But it's very quiet.
Why is it quiet?
Just as you can imagine, I think everyone is looking to ensure that they're out of the spotlight, out of the crosshairs, and quietly doing the work that they know that they should be doing. One other area beyond carbon, I think that you're seeing here at Climate Week, is this convergence of traditional energy and renewable energy or alternative energy, where really they're coming under one tent. We heard yesterday from the chair of the Energy Dominance Council from the Trump administration talking about the 3 priorities of the administration. One is to have abundant domestic energy, where there's traditional and renewable energy coming together to power AI, which we don't even know how big that requirement is going to be, to supplying our allies with all the residual energy that we produce here in the U.S. and ensuring that there are deals being struck with our allies. And then third, which is a little bit of a wild card, is nuclear energy dominance, and that is a big focal area for the administration as well. So energy dominance.
What's the reality when it comes to traditional forms of energy, carbon-infused energy versus renewable, whether it's green, whether it's wind, whether it's solar? I know nuclear kind of plays within it, although some would say you got to worry a little bit about the waste and so on and so forth. But I mean, folks are not turning their back on renewables.
No.
And has there been any shift? Because, you know, Tim, you often bring up the president is very vocal about how he feels about wind. I know there was a ruling today, though, that is allowing a project to go through, I think, the one in Rhode Island.
Yeah, so Ørsted shares are higher as a result.
Right. So it's just, you know, trying to understand, as we say, the narrative that sometimes we're hearing in public versus what's going on behind the scenes. It's still moving ahead in terms of the renewable and green space.
The reality is that the renewable space has turned to be economically comparable to a lot of traditional energy sources at this point. So without subsidies from the U.S. government or from governments around the world, these projects are viable. They're economically viable. They compete. They have to have, they compete in areas where there is heavy wind flow and there is sun, abundant sun, and there is abundant kind of energy sources from these renewable spaces. But nonetheless, they're economically viable. So they'll persist despite rhetoric.
But are they economically viable without government support, without government tax incentives?
Yes. I think in a lot of instances, you see that these are economically viable. You see less and less subsidies being flown into major solar renewable energy projects at this point.
I'll ask the question another way. Are they viable with tariffs?
I suppose you could say, again, when you think about it from the all of the above solution set, there's going to be parts of the United States that are going to have economically viable renewable energy projects that have no oil and gas. And there's going to be parts of the United States that have oil and gas but don't have consistent sunshine or consistent wind flow. So it really just depends upon where you are in the United States. And absolutely, when you think about the role of tariffs coming in, any import is going to be impacted. And so therefore, you come to the same conclusion, which is energy dominance from a domestic supply chain.
The cost of power, and the president talked about it being more expensive here. Is it because of AI that power is more expensive? Is he right in terms of the big picture?
I think it's very regional, right? The cost of energy, I'm from California, and the cost of energy is high. Then there's parts of Texas. We were recently in a part of Texas where folks who are taking power from the grid at certain times of day are actually getting paid to take the energy off of the grid because there's an oversupply, largely from renewable energy projects, plus all of the fossil fuel industry across Texas. So it's so localized and it's so regionally dependent based off of a lot of state and local regulations and taxes, less so than at a federal level. And then I think you can say the same across Europe and across other parts of the world as well. It's very localized.
I know we want more time. What would be your advice to investors? I mean, based on what you are seeing, and just got about 30 seconds here.
Look, I think we're really focused on doing more with less, looking at your supply chain, trying to find ways to clean the supply chain, but also utilize more assets in your supply chain. There's a lot of waste when economic boom is in place. And now if you see a little bit of a contraction, now you have to do more with less. So find ways to clean up your operations and create more efficiency.
Interesting. All right. She is the CEO and founder of Artemeter, Olivia Albrecht, joining us here in studio. I'm so glad. Thank you for coming back, because I know we couldn't get to you yesterday, and we're really glad. Hey, when we come back and check on trading and some stocks on the move, you are listening and watching Bloomberg Businessweek Daily. This is Bloomberg.
You're listening to Bloomberg Businessweek Daily with Carol Massar and Tim Stenovec on Bloomberg Radio and Television.
All right, everybody, this is Bloomberg Businessweek Daily. Carol Massar along with Tim Stenovec. Hey, there's a new issue of Bloomberg Businessweek. It is devoted to the moguls, celebrities, and entrepreneurs defining the next phase of pop culture. And on the cover, YouTube star Mr. Beast, Tim knows him well, who is building an entertainment empire. The story is by our own Lucas Shaw, keeper of the Screen Time universe at Bloomberg. He's also Bloomberg News managing editor, media and entertainment, and writer of the Screen Time newsletter. And the issue devoted to screen time, and it coincides with an event that we will be at. Yeah,
Bloomberg Live out in Los Angeles, in Hollywood, October 8th and 9th. We will be there. If there are still tickets available, you can get them online. It is a fantastic event. We got some huge names.
Remember Snoop last year?
Snoop was there, yeah.
It was pretty wild.
That was pretty cool.
It was a great conversation. And there's going to be a lot there.
Yeah, there's going to be a lot there. We're going to be there.
All right.
And I think that's enough to get people to come to Screen Time.
Come. Watch. All right, let's get back to the markets. We are seeing stocks bounce around near their lows of the session.
Can I just give a little preview of who's going to be there this year? It's pretty cool. Okay, so Willow Bay is going to be there.
Yeah.
She's the dean at the USC Annenberg School for Communication. Ryan Coogler, screenwriter, producer, co-founder of Proximity Media. I just watched Sinners over the weekend. That's his film, so he'll be there. David Ellison. It's been in the news quite a bit lately.
Heard of him?
Yeah, so he'll be there
kind
as
of at
well.
the center of so much.
Yeah. Rick Caruso, somebody we've interviewed recently. He's maybe going to throw his hat in the ring when it comes to mayor of Los Angeles or governor. There. Maybe. Head of Instagram. How's this for Screen Time? Over at Meta Platforms, Adam Mosseri. a lifer when it comes to Facebook. He'll be there as well.
Yeah, some heavy hitters.
Big heavy hitters, yeah.
And you really get an idea of kind of the trends when it comes to anybody and everybody who's involved in content creation in all of its forms. All right, let's get back to the markets. As we said, we're kind of hovering near our lows of the session. I'm Carol Massar along with Tim Stenovec. Let's also get to some stocks on the move today. And with us is Bloomberg News equities reporter Norah Mulinda joining us right now. And she is the keeper of some of the big movers and shakers on any given day. Boeing rallying today.
We are seeing shares of Boeing higher. That's ticker BA. Shares are up about 2% right now in trading. Lots of activity and chatter in the market, and this is especially after this idea that it'll be securing an order from Uzbekistan Airways, especially as we think about this company and the history that we saw over the past year, where it was grappling down 30-some% last year. We're seeing the stock recouping some of its gains this year, and so it's good for the company to hear about these orders, great for investors especially, but also Trump has really been touting the idea that he is mostly responsible for the fact that we're getting a lot of these deals coming through, especially with the UN General Assembly this week. That's really been in the spotlight. We have several countries like Turkey, Uzbekistan, as I mentioned before, Morocco, Indonesia. These are some countries that are either considering or have announced orders here for Boeing.
Great plane diplomacy story on the Bloomberg terminal. Check it out. Sid Phillip, Julie Johnson, among the people who wrote it. But it's the idea of Boeing being used as its bargaining chip when it comes to negotiations on all levels.
Yeah, well, we talk about transactional things that happen out of the White House, right? And so you feel like this certainly plays into it big time. Boeing's been on, a bit of a tear this year, right?
It has been doing quite well, up 22% so far this year. That's definitely a different story when you put it against the losses that we saw last year.
That's a good point, right? Very different trade. Let's talk about Kenvue. Man, this one's been kicked around a bit.
You can't escape the news here.
That's a good way to describe it.
Kicked around. We'll take that one.
It has.
Yeah, so we're looking at shares of Kenvue. That's ticker KVUE. Up about 2% right now in trading today. Of course, this is us looking at the stock that is recouping some of its losses that we saw yesterday. The big news yesterday, President Trump saying that pregnant women should avoid taking Tylenol because it could potentially contribute toward autism for their children. We're hearing news today from scientists and from others on Wall Street saying that there is no scientific evidence to support this being the case. And so we are seeing a rebound in the stock today in trading, up as much as 7.2% earlier. That's its best intraday level, or best intraday performance since May, rather. So now up about 2% as Wall Street really digests this news.
Okay, finally, Vistra. What's going on with Vistra today?
Vistra, this is also a stock that's in focus, but on the downside here, down as much as 5.5%. This is after we saw a rating change here. It was downgraded at Jefferies. They're voicing concerns about the lack of announcement for a data center deal. We know that's been topical. Everyone wants to talk data centers lately. Apparently, there was no announcement here for the company, specifically for its Comanche Peak nuclear power plant here. So the analyst here is writing the fact that he remains confident on a deal, but no announcement yet is what's giving him pause here. So you are seeing shares pressured here as we are seeing that downgrade.
This kind of plays so much into one of the big themes, right? The investment themes of this year.
Absolutely.
In terms of powering it. So again, you said the stock is down, and I'm just taking a look. It's up almost 50% year to date.
Oh yeah, you can't miss that part. Up 50% year to date. So really, when you're putting it in context here, what's 5%, right?
A little bit of perspective. Bloomberg Television Markets Correspondent. I think I had your title wrong, so I just want to make sure because she's keeping us honest.
That's new as of yesterday.
Exactly.
Yes, day 2.
Congratulations.
All over Bloomberg TV. She's Norah Mulinda joining us with Stock Movers. Check out Stock Movers, our podcast, 5-minute episodes, biggest winners and losers at any given time during the trading day. You can find it on Apple, Spotify, or anywhere you get your podcasts. We do have a headline crossing. President Trump saying President Putin and Russia in big trouble. Time for Ukraine to act.
Kind of dovetails really well with what we're talking about next hour. We are going all in on this week's UN General Assembly. Also investing in an America First world and a world of geopolitical uncertainty. That and more next on Bloomberg Businessweek Daily.